guys. We've been introduced already. Maybe it would be a good idea if we start by each one of you giving us little highlights of what it is that you do in your role. Paweł, should we start with you?
Yeah. Hello, good afternoon. My name is Paweł Łopata. I'm head of pre-sales in Comarch. However, I've been working on many positions in Comarch since I've been there for almost 30 years already. So head of R&D, head of implementations now, and the business side.
Rob? I'm Rob Johnson. I'm the CTO of Prime Fiber and Novos Fiber, although I'm here to talk about Prime Fiber. I'm from Dallas, so on behalf of the city, welcome. Novos is actually building retail here in Dallas, so there's for local citizens to see the billboards up and going out to fiber to the home. And then we recently announced for Prime that we're doing a wholesale play with a large ISP also headquartered not too far down the road.
Great. Manish.
Awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. So good to see you. Very unique venue. TM Forum, Dean, thank you so much. My name is Manish Mangal. I am the Chief Technology Officer for the telecom business at Tech Mahindra and also the Global Business Head for the Network Services.
Great, thank you. I'm Dean Ramsay. I run research and media at TM Forum. So we're talking about leveraging AI for fault detection. I think today's sessions have all been really interesting. They started out nice and broad and, with the keynotes talking about the industry broadly, and we kind of focused down into this more specifics. So we got the right people in the panel, I think, to be able to talk about this area and how AI is being deployed here. So thinking about boosting network reliability, what is AI bringing to the table that we didn't have in the past? Manish, maybe we could start with you.
Yeah, no, I think I'll answer this in 2-3 different ways. One is we are on this mission to zero-touch service assurance. Right? And if you really look at the network and the reliability of the network has become the #1 priority for everybody today. You look at last 3-4 years, the number of outages that the networks have seen just because of the complexity that it has been created. And quite a few of them actually happen because of the human touch with change management process. Now, we are trying to make something change, new patch or whatever available into the network. Some command got misrepresented and suddenly you have a widespread outages, right? I think the first place to start is how can technology help us remove and eliminate some of those human errors so that as we are getting a lot more complex, those technologies can come to the rescue and become an advisor to help solve those initial problems and eliminate those issues.
Yeah. And I guess that, you mentioned zero-touch service assurance there and how I guess it's all linked to service fulfillment and that central role of OSS. We're seeing a lot of focus from operators on that at the moment because it feels like it's kind of the path towards the future operating mode that will enable them to do new service models and, address the ecosystem in bigger ways. So, are you seeing that with your telco customers? Is that like a real focus for them at the moment to try and push automation through that part of the IT architecture?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very high priority, no doubt about it. And it's not driven just because of the cost savings initiative, but it's also driven for the reliability of the network. Yeah. Right. And so you can do the architecture and design and deployment, but really that's not where you see the problems. It's always when you are doing the change management, right? So we are definitely seeing a lot of priority. Now the question is, how do you implement it ubiquitously so that you actually get the closed loop across the board? And that's, of course, you can do much more on the legacy architectures. So you try and pick the right architecture to start with, and then let that become a norm as you start deploying newer capability.
Yeah.
So we definitely are, and we'll be happy to share a bit more as we go through this session. But we are seeing sort of the training wheel approach, where it's not elimination of the human, it's actually advisor to the human adding on to it so that you can start AI to really give them some more knowledge, some more enhancement, some more intelligence when the humans are involved. And then slowly you're going to get lesser and lesser of the human touch and more of the automation being closed loop.
Yeah, sure. Rob, I guess your background here is unique, and we hear a lot from tier 1 people who are have these huge organizations and are thinking about AI implementation, spending millions of dollars. What's your perspective? What's AI bringing to your world specifically?
I got a couple vendors in the audience, and they really want me to spend a couple $1 million on AI. I see one of them over there. No, I actually think we're really at an interesting tipping point. I've been doing this 26 years, and mostly startups, mostly small operators. We were talking earlier about I worked for a while at Deutsche Telekom, but for the most part, small operators. And in a lot of ways, we're still managing networks the same way we've been doing it for 26 years. You know, fault management doesn't look a lot different than it did a decade ago. But with AI and machine learning, we really do have some interesting tools that we can apply now to try to get us out of this mode of the machines are talking to us in their language and we're not really able to parse that, is to feed all that into another machine and say, okay, look at all these disparate data points, pull all together, give me a big picture and feed it to me in a human readable way. And then my guys can actually take that and we can scale. And then I don't ever become a tier 1 operator with, 1,000 guys in the NOC. I've got, a handful.
Yeah.
And they're able to use those tools to do that.
Yeah. And are you seeing the supply chain set up to be able to kind of provide those products and software at the moment, or is it does it still feel like it's in an exploratory phase for you?
At the risk of offending some of those vendors, no, I do. I think it's still early stages. I actually had a conversation on the floor, really interesting product, pulling a lot of disparate data points together to talk about like churn and how do we eliminate churn by looking at network performance. Because like here in the States, it's very competitive from the perspective of like not having a contract and being able to churn between providers very quickly, kind of like in the wireless world once you get to the end of your contract. And looking at the data points that kind of feed into that and how do we pull all that together and get some visibility and some metrics that actually matter to the money guys. We raised a good bit of money and actually just raised some more. And there's a whole list of covenants and requirements that come with that, like managing your churn and being able to use these tools to effectively do that. But we're still very early in the getting folks out there to see a use case and then feeding it back to me.
Yeah, sure. Paweł, this is something that Comarch work on day in, day out, and you have been doing for 30 years, maybe something like that?
Yeah, indeed.
So, how are you seeing it in terms of developing software and what your customers are asking for, and how does it link to the broader IT OSS architecture that you provide?
Okay. So as you said, we are on the market for 30 years, and we are OSS provider apart from BSS as well. For us, the most important part is to being pragmatic for us and for our customers, for telco operators and others. So from one side, as Manish said, there is always this holy grail of automation, holy grail of zero-touch approach. But on the other hand, the use case must be monetized, must bring real value. So if we are talking today about these fault-related issues, so in general, in assurance area, there are several aspects which are discussed in a very generic way. And for us, the most important part is to focus on some real cases. Yeah? That's what we do, what's important for us. Not only GenAI. We've been hearing today a lot of GenAI-based use cases, solutions. But as I see it, the humanity run in circles. So for last 20, 30, 40 years, we are trying to communicate with computers using binary languages and then going through text-based communications. And now we have to transform binary into human readable form for the artificial intelligence like large language models to be able to process this kind of information. So for example, one of major problems as I see it, especially in the domain of assurance, is, for example, the data preparations. If we talk about LLMs, it's relatively easy because we already have LLMs based on huge text data. In telecommunications, especially in domains of assurance, we don't have it. We have to prepare it. So this is, for example, another aspect we have to take into account and which is important for us.
Mm-hmm. So that segues nicely into my next question. I think we heard a lot about data this morning, and the preparing of the telcos' data assets for AI, specifically Gen AI. While I was watching that, I was thinking about this session, and I was thinking about that ever-growing complexity down in the network, and how operators are thinking about dealing with that. Manish, maybe I'll start with you. How are you seeing operators addressing their data in-house and prepping for things like GenAI? And how does that relate to doing things like fault detection in the network when you've got all of those disparate data sources coming up and, really changes the assurance function, right?
Yeah. No, I think you hit on a very, very important point because, the fundamental baseline is data. If you don't have the right data, then it's a junk in, junk out. So you can apply any model that you want. You really won't be able to get anything out of it. But I'm very happy to see that pretty much across the board, almost all telecom operators have taken the journey to clean up the data, create common data lakes where the data sources can actually pull in the data in a common formats, and create a more systematic approach of managing the data on a day-to-day. It's not just one-time cleanup, but keep it as a clean data to be available. And those programs are in place in most of the customers that we have seen, and it's a very encouraging thing to do. But yes, it's very complex, especially when you start to look at some of those legacy platforms. They house data inside the platforms. They are not API enabled to be able to get the data out into the data lakes. So there are certain constraints. And yes, it's not a problem that can be solved overnight. But one of the things that we have been very heavily focused is really just a very, is a competent practice around data and analytics, where we actually have a program in terms of how do you take the current state, look at all the sources of the data where it's available today, what's the right format of the data, what's the clean versus junk data looks like it, and create a journey and a transformation to really create a data lake where all the data can be moved. So those kind of things are happening now in the industry. And that's the reason why we are starting to see the initial use cases of the GenAI actually being implemented and have the confidence in it. But you're absolutely right. I mean, without that, I wouldn't even recommend to start any other programs of AI or automation unless you have actually created a data structure to be clean.
Yeah. Get your house in order first, right?
Yeah.
I think, the TM Forum has, the many collaboration groups. There's a new collaboration group that's specifically designed around data, the modern data architecture group. And the uptake for it straight away was massive because, there's so many players in the industry realize that this is like the first step on a success journey for GenAI. So, Rob, I guess data is at the heart of lots of the things that you do in your network. What are you seeing? What's the main things that keep you awake at night about readying that for AI and how you already use AI?
Well, it's you'd think with a company of our size and being as young as we are that we wouldn't have a lot of like data management issues, but we went from funding to revenue in 6 months, and to do that, you kind of have to execute out of order. So we've created this out of order execution. So there's all these things like taking care of your data and making sure you manage it appropriately. We'll get to that. We're going to get to that. And so we've actually started the process now that we're well on the way of going back and using machine learning tools to start cleaning up the data. So it's not just the biggest issue for us is human intervention. You put data in a spreadsheet or you put it in a table and somebody goes in and drops the table or whatever. And so we're using these tools now to go in and scrape it and clean it up and start running it through. And it's getting us much more consistent results. And it's allowing us to maybe abstract away a little bit from the human element and the human error problem.
Yeah. I know the joy of that because my very first job in telecoms 25 years ago was cleaning up data in a network inventory. So that was fun. So Paweł, I guess, this is this something that you start with as a kind of blueprint for the way that you start to think about building software systems, helping telcos with their data assets and how that all feeds into any kind of solution they might buy from you?
So again, being pragmatic, I have to say it depends.
Yeah.
So if you have different use cases, let's imagine we have this zero-touch approach. At a certain point, we have to do reconfiguration of the network, for example. So we need to have a certain scripts. Down in the lowest level, we have to talk into the devices or element management systems, network management systems, where we need to have a specific code, specific procedures, for example. Now, how we can make it working? By boosting through AI. So for example, we may try to create those scripts with AI help by analysis and conversion of the human readable documentation from the vendors, from the equipment vendors. There is a documentation, we can read it, we can put it through AI and create scripts. But the end result will be dependent on this on the quality of this documentation. Yeah. So this is a very human-oriented quality of data. Yeah. On the other hand, when we consider use cases based from, for example, on the performance management tools, so analysis of trends of certain parameters in the network, these are very technical parameters, very, very well defined in a technical way. We just have a values, sequences of values over time, and we try to predict or forecast what will be in the future. We try to predict the patterns, or we try to, let's say, cluster similar events in the network into typical situations, yes, to be able to detect anomalies. And then again, based on the quality of data, which is a different type of data, which is technical data, we can have a better or worse results. And in this case, what is important is, for example, labeling of this data. We cannot do it without the help of humans. So this is the different types. So if we want to think about the application of AI, not just the LLMs, which are very well working right now, but in general, there are many, many aspects to be taken into account. Yeah.
So that's interesting. Thinking about that, that coexistence of GenAI and predictive AI.
Yeah.
How are you seeing that played out? And you know, I mean, in some instances, there are very obvious use cases where you say, well, this is a GenAI discipline, and we'll pursue that. But it seems that there needs to be a symbiotic strategy there. There needs to be kind of ahead of time that these two things can coexist. Are you seeing operators being aware of that in the way that they think about architecting systems?
Yeah, that's what we try to promote, a kind of hybrid approach. Yeah. Where whenever we talk with telco operators or service providers about AI, some of them are very skeptical, some of them are too enthusiastic, I would say, and we try to find a good balance. Yeah. Still, even today, we can do a lot of typical tasks, typical use cases based on deterministic approach, rule-based. If this is possible, and it's really a good approach still, because we have 100% deterministic thing. If we talk about AI, in certain cases, in certain models, we talk about the probabilities. So we may detect alarms earlier, for example, the major failures, but it is based only on the probability. So we may say that 60%, 70% chance is that we will have a major failure, but it is not fully determined. Mm-hmm. So this hybrid approach is a must.
Yeah. What about you guys? I guess this idea of some AI usage maybe as a tool that's kind of bolted on rather than baked into software systems, and there'll always be an element of that like hybrid environment where you have tools here and then, but then as time goes by, AI will become a native aspect of the whole operational architecture from a software perspective. Rob, are you seeing that? Are you kind of seeing opportunistic places where AI tools can be quite inexpensive and effective, and maybe it won't be a permanent feature, but it will be, it'll serve a cause in the short term?
Yeah, classic 80-20. We're going to get 80% of our gain from 20% of that implementation. Yeah. We've actually looked at some scenarios where we have platforms that don't have really any AI to speak of, and we're pulling data out, running it through an AI engine, and then putting it back in a sort of a bolt-on, and actually being able to feed that in there. And so for those targeted use cases that we were talking about, being able to do that, I do think that something we had talked about earlier, having the vendors prepared not only with the use case, but that if they're bringing me a specific use case, that the model is trained on that, and that we're not doing a lot of that because a lot of us don't carry that much data around for that application as well. So most of those use cases are like very specific to NLP and GenAI, and pulling conversations out from customers, feeding it through, and saying, what do you really think they're talking about? Is it one of these 5 things? Okay, great. Run a subroutine and try to solve that problem for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Manish, when you're working with customers, how do you approach that? You're thinking about systems they can use, tools they can use. How do you line them up, and how do they coexist?
Yeah, no, you look for the problems to solve for. So I'll give an example. We were actually working with a customer in the network operations. We were helping them actually run their operations. And we realized that, there is so much of data that comes into the operations of a network that anybody who is a NOC engineer doesn't have the ability to comprehend all of that information and solve the tickets when they are coming in. So the challenge was that, how do you create an assistance for them so that they can actually make it easier to do the RCA, and hence it takes shorter time to do the RCA, and hence shorter time to fix the problem as well. And there is a downward dependencies as well. So if you're running into the NOC, you have field services, you're sending a dispatch somewhere. And how do you make the dispatch more effective as well? So we kind of came up with what we call as a ticket resolution advisor and a dispatch advisor, which was a GenAI tool that sits as an augmented tool along with the operations, so that the NOC engineer can actually ask questions into the system of, I've got this problem, what do I do? What are my options? Where have you seen this before? And it sort of uses the GenAI capability to reduces the number of dependencies and gets to the possibilities faster. That's one area, and the enrichment of the ticket happens as a part of that, so that anybody who's handling the tickets can solve that better. The second area we saw the lot of benefit was that you also have this shifts in the NOC that happens from one shift to the other. And when you are in the middle of a ticket and the shifts change, the new shifts when it comes in, they don't have the whole background about what's been happening there. So for them to really start from scratch, typically it takes a little longer time. So getting GenAI to really enrich that capability up front becomes very useful. So we started to see these kind of, I call it the point use cases, where you can actually implement the GenAI with a limited set of the data that you need for that function, and start to solve that problems, create the awareness, create the ROI for the investments. And this is something, and we work with a partner with AWS on this one to really leverage their capability and build something that can be fundamental in nature. Because once you have the LLM ready, and you can transform into an SLM, which takes less space, you can start to really build a lot of these models based on whatever type of data is available.
Yeah.
Right? So we start with the tickets, then you can translate into, can I do autocorrelation with it so that I can reduce the number of tickets I have to deal with? Then you can translate into, can I start becoming more predictive so that the number of tickets can actually be even lesser? The journey can go on once you have the fundamental capabilities.
Yeah. You mentioned prediction there, predictive operations. I think, as anyone who's been around in this industry for a while will know that we've been talking about predictive network and self-healing networks and like for many years. Do you feel like we're kind of, AI is the enabler of that era? We've tried before and it's kind of fizzled and gone in waves and hasn't really happened. Do you feel like this could be the tipping point and the enabler of that future?
Yeah, I'm an optimist, so I will say yes, of course, because I think the biggest constraint for being able to predict something was having enough history.
Yeah.
Right, and a history that can be actually correlated to create the predictions for what the future would look like. Although, if we knew how to predict, we all would have been very rich with the stock market, and we wouldn't be sitting here talking, right? So there is a limitations to what you can predict at the end of the day. But if you can just narrow it down enough so that you know where to look for, that's a lot of value as well. Because when those 7 tickets come, when you have an outage situation, you don't have time to deal with anything at that time, right? So if you don't know at that time what, maybe you missed it, so I don't think it's going to be a perfect world where you can actually predict and have no faults, right? Things will happen in the network. We are getting a lot more complex. But the simulations that you can do with scenarios will get better with AI, and that will allow you to actually anticipate few things better. So even if you're not able to actually predict and avoid it, you are able to deal with it better when it happens. I think that would be the more shorter term benefit. But AI is AI. We don't know what it will develop into, and maybe one day we'll have everything predictable and we have 0 tickets in the operations, and yeah, it would be a great day.
Yeah. Rob, is that something that's on the cards for you? Is that on your roadmap? I think it's a reality.
I'm an optimist too, but I don't think it's going to be quite that cool. I'll do this by way of a story. As a consultant, I did the VoIP engineering for a WiMAX company. We were having tremendous problems with the voice quality, and we had a meeting with the WiMAX guys, and we said, "Look here, 10% packet loss," and they were high-fiving. 10% packet loss. Our network is great. it's all about perspective, right? 10% is great for them, but it's terrible for voice, right? It's like kind of the same thing with AI. If you look at like precision versus recall, and I can make a model always predictive by always answering yes, it's right half the time, you know? So as you look at the trade-offs between those, and we're looking at models that are 70, 80% accurate, and the machine learning guys are high-fiving each other, 80% accuracy. And, you know, my boss is looking at me saying, you need to be 99.9% accurate.
Yeah.
So it's just all different perspective.
Yeah. Paweł, I didn't want to sound pessimistic there. Did Comarch have a SON solution that I've just trashed? What do you think about, you know, the idea of predictive operations in the future?
Yes, this is one of the themes we are also talking about. What Manish said, that sometimes we do not have time to define, to analyze. We have to predict. That's very true. Again, there will be use cases when we can say, okay, we don't care. Whatever happens, we don't care. So we need to prioritize. We need to know for which use cases we should go into this predictive mode, for which we can afford to not to do that way. And in case of prediction, again, we will be talking about the probabilities of things to happen. And well, from experience, some cases like failures in the network, failures in equipment, in battery, in powering, in air conditioning, whatever, everything is needed for the service to operate in the lowest level. Some could be predicted based on like a week of data, could be predicted 5 hours before it happens. Is it big? Is it enough? It's not spectacular. So if you say about being pessimistic, so far, the results are inconclusive, I would say. But in some other cases, we can predict like 2 days before the failures. The problem with AI is that, as I said, it's not deterministic. And in the morning, it was a discussion, also a presentation, about the knowing how AI came to certain conclusions, why it decided that something might happen. This is what we don't know, actually, even if we teach the system by ourselves. We don't know what's inside. Yeah? There might be surprises.
Yeah. So we've got about 5 or 6 minutes left. I'd like to open the conversation to the floor. If anyone has any questions, would you raise your hand? I do realize that we're almost at happy hour and I'm standing in between you and a cocktail, but please, if anybody's got any questions for the panel. Anyone?
Yeah, there's a question.
I think we have. Just wait for the microphone. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, Nadine Manjaro with Virtusa. So I was going to ask Rob, are you using AI for fiber deployment or capital allocation when it comes to fiber deployment, like some of the others have mentioned?
No, so we don't, getting back to like the 80% accuracy type questions, you know, we're not currently using AI to plan where we're going, to design networks. We are looking at some tools where we can use some machine learning modeling to allow us to better lay out our fiber routes within the environment. We're mostly focused on using it on the back end. It started out in customer experience and being able to respond to customer requests more accurately and more quickly. And then it's like creeping its way into when you start with customer experience and service assurance and what's the quality of experience and how do I use these tools to make that better. On the front end, I think there's it's still a bit of a dark art when it comes to the outside plant guys and how they come up with the way they route the network. I think it'll probably stay like that for another couple of years.
If I may add to this, to comment, but there are already certain use cases which could be useful for network planning, especially for optical networks planning. One I can imagine is the resource allocation. So optimal resource allocation, finding out what is best to use based on multi-criteria, actually, not just the cost, business criteria, power criteria, many others, green even, yeah. And the other is, for example, data stitching. If you do the discovery, this is also about the quality of the inventory networks, as we discussed in the beginning. Some things cannot be discovered from the network to keep up to date the databases, and then they have to be recreated or reconfigured in the system itself. And then in this area, AI could be really helpful as well. Yeah.
assets to be there and it's not there.
Yeah.
Right? And they have to go another truck or if they don't have the right equipment.
Exactly. That's about the discovery and the reconciliation. So actually decision making about which data is correct, whether in your inventory, what the field service manager discovered, or what we can discover automatically.
Yeah, I don't know about you guys. We don't let them come back until they find it.
Sure.
They have to stay all day.
Just one truck roll, right? But
One
it's
truck
like
roll.
5 days long.
My stats are great. Yeah.
If we talk about science fiction, we can also use, the drones to send and see, make pictures, analyze what's there, and so on.
Sure.
Rob, that's operation successful, patient dead.
Okay, I have a question. In context to everything that we talked about, right? What are your thoughts on building digital twins, to implement these AI models, predictive analysis, everything, and where are you guys on that journey?
Is it me, you, everybody?
All of you.
Yeah.
Maybe Rob, start with you.
I've been to a couple of shows and talked to a couple of vendors who are very excited about building digital twins for fiber networks. To your point about being able to find things in the network and actually be able to visualize this. So there's some interesting technology out there. Also, a couple of companies that I've seen that are looking at taking pictures of handholds, taking pictures of locations, and then being able to run that against an algorithm to determine whether or not has someone already submitted this picture. Is this picture actually of a handhole? Is it my handhole? Is it my vendor? Is it closed? All the things that you would want to see from that perspective, because as you start to scale up the build, people going out there, you've got hundreds of pictures coming back every day, and you don't have enough people to go through and deal with all that. But then all that data kind of can feed back into the digital twinning process. So there's definitely some exciting stuff happening out there.
I think our experience is also, it's a starting stage, and it's also, network digital twin is just a broad category, right? If you look at the RAN, it's very different. Fiber is different. Core is different. You look at the, OSS platforms, it's very different. So you start to peel the onion and you say that I can't create a network digital twin that covers end-to-end everything. It's just impossible to create at this time. However, if I can do like a fiber plant digital twin where, let's say if I have to predict that I've got to, serve the capacity to a next tier of, let's say 100 gig offer in the market, what would my impact to the capacity would look like it? What the design changes would look like it? Can I visualize it? Does it help in the planning process? Those things are starting to happen. Same thing in the core network, mobility core network and RAN as well. But these are still more pointed solutions that are starting to say, this small area that I can cover, I'll create a twin for that and figure it out what to do with it. What it doesn't solve for is still your end-to-end challenge of, how do I look for maybe smart CapEx, right? Which is, I've got this much CapEx to spend, what all the data I need to get in and where do I use a digital twin to anticipate the CapEx optimization? Or you look at, I've got hurricane anticipated coming in, what will this hurricane do to my Southeast network? And what do I do to predict it? So there is not end-to-end things that are yet there. We are seeing the glimpses of it into specific pockets, and I think they will only evolve as we go.
So maybe one additional facet to this aspect of digital twin, it was a very attractive, maybe it still is, very attractive buzzword, okay, years ago, especially for specific type of analysis, which you can do in the digital domain, like impact analysis, for example. What we've observed, challenges in our customers, the main problem is that it's very costly. You need to keep the data up to date. You need to have this representation. And maybe it's not even a problem with cleaning up the data, moving the data into the digital domain, but then maintaining it. So it's about the processes rather than the data itself. Once you have the data and you have the processes, you can do the operations in the digital world. But this is costly, still costly.
Great, thank you. Well, we're out of time. So Manish, Rob, Paweł, thank you very much for sharing your experience, and thanks for sticking around, everyone.